The order of the meeting of the Joshua Basin Water District Regular Meeting Board of Directors, Wednesday, August 21st. And I would ask Mr. Marquez if you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome one and all.
Microphones.
Determination of a quorum. General Manager.
President Johnson, with all 5 members present, you have a quorum.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So moved, so done. Public comment. Members of the public may address the board at this time with regard to matters within the board's jurisdiction that are not listed on the agenda. State law prohibits the board of directors from discussing or taking action on items not included on the agenda. Members of the public will have the opportunity for public comment on any item listed on the agenda that is addressed on the agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. That was quick, Al.
Yeah, I had to get up here early. Of course, my comment is only going to be for a few seconds, but that's here nor there. Al Marquez, Sunfair Community of Joshua Tree. I would like to compliment the board and staff for all these years of the Water District operations, but it pains me to make these comments, but I'm still worried about well 14. It's been out of service for 2.5 years at a cost of more than $1,500,000, and it's still not up. And this puts a lot of pressure on well 15, 16, and 17 to supply water for the district. And I'm perplexed about the board of directors not trying to get this well back online in the 2.5 years plus that it's been offline. And they could have drilled another well and would have cost lots less. And they could put a well up there by that tank over there by where Reynolds lives on the south side of the highway. And it would be less cost effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comments?
Excellent.
Well said. Second that
one. Did you get that down for the members?
I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll make that motion. I'm saddened by the fact that we're not going to spend 45 minutes talking about the bad debt. But that's my way of being facetious, and with that, I'll make my motion.
There is, if I may interrupt, there is one change to the minutes of the July 17th meeting. During the attorney's comments, it was noted that the Cadiz project had gone through the State Assembly. However, it should read that Senate Bill 307 cleared the Assembly and is on the way to the governor for signature. So we'll make that change. Provide that back to the next board meeting.
And that's on page 21 of 69, about 3/4 of the way down. With that correction, I have a second.
I just want to quickly comment that that I didn't attend the meeting on the 31st, so I just want to make note of that, but I will be voting on the minutes. And then secondly, that the bill was signed by the governor, so we could update it to reflect that. So.
All right, with those comments and additions, I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So moved, so done. Item number 7, Citizens Advisory and Legislative and Public Information Committees. And that'll be Mark Ban.
Sure. This agenda item is sort of broken down into 2 parts. The first being a revision to the membership guidelines for the CAC. It includes a name change at the request of the CAC from the Citizens Advisory Committee to the Citizens Advisory Council. It also outlines more stringent, or minimum, I should say, attendance requirements, that CAC members actually attend 3 meetings, or if they miss 3 meetings, rather, then they could be subject for dismissal. That would actually take place over a 6-month period, since they only meet bi-monthly, so there'd be relatively quite a bit of information that they would miss during that time period. And also it affects the ability to have a quorum and even have the meeting take place. So it also allows the CAC the ability to meet with other district committees as needed. And then as a district's commitment towards future CAC members, also outlines a training syllabus for minimum training guidelines. That includes some of our supervisors providing PowerPoint presentations on how the district operationally functions, and also would invite them, obviously, to join some of our tours that we have twice a year minimum. So, if there's any questions about any of this material, I'd like to go over that first before moving on to the appointments.
Director Reynolds?
I'm fine.
Director Ritter?
I'm really pleased. Thank you so much, Mark, for doing this. It's good for us. I'm on the Legislative Public Information Committee with Tom Flowen, Kathleen, and I think it's really important for us to work with CAC and Citizens Advisory Council. We share a lot of the same mission, and having them as a good, well-informed council to work with us and advise us, and I just like everything you did, and I think it's really great. They would have training from production, which would be an overview of our groundwater wells, the boosters, reservoirs, distribution, the pipe networks, the fire hydrant service lines, finance, which would be budget, income, reserves, debt, administration, how the customer service people work, human resources, rules and regulations, governance, overview of the Brown Act and ethics. Also, being on the water tour, at least once a year. And I think that these would be good things too for future board members who, now with the districting, we may get people who don't have a whole lot of background but want to serve. And this is great. Thank you so much on this. I'm really pleased. And I just want to make a correction. Paul F. Coates' name has an E on the end. C-O-A-T-E. Sorry.
I'd also like to say thank you to Karen, our chair on the CAC, for the work she put towards revising these as well. So
Excellent.
we appreciate that.
Thank you, Karen. Excellent.
Get the help from.
Good.
Director Hunt?
I just need some clarification on the attendance policy. You mentioned missing 3 meetings. Would that be consecutive or during a certain period of time, or within their entire tenure? What would be the...
It would be consecutive, yeah, and that's also subject to them getting a hold of someone and letting them know that they're, either ill or, things pop up. So I think as long as they stay in communication with the district and let us know what's going on, then, even that is subject to future deliberation, so.
Okay, that sounds reasonable to me.
One of the meetings that we had regarding this subject, the general manager, who's sitting right there, he can correct me if I'm wrong, he said that he very much appreciated the Citizens Advisory Council as a sort of a sounding board for some of the stuff that's going on, some of the things that he may want to do, and it just seems like the sounding board, by the way, is long term. But my point is that to have a sort of a contemporary, up-to-date, well-briefed council will enhance his ability to get something of value when he runs something by them. And attaching it to the Legislative Public Information Committee in some way, in my view, does not at all diminish the importance of the CAC. I think they are really important. It's another avenue for the community to get in here and contribute, and we need all the help we can get. Thank you, Mr. President.
Why don't you say I applaud the efforts, being a long-standing CAC member back in the day, good education, good quality stuff. I like the fact that we're beefing it up and getting some energy in there, and get some lively conversations going. And it won't just be with the legislative information committee, it'll also be with all of the committees. So I'm hoping they'll direct their energies toward the finance committee. And, with that being said, do I need a motion, or what do you need from us?
We'll follow through with the appointments and then make that
All right.
motion, yeah. So now, moving on, we have three applicants here with us today. I think all three of them are here by now. No, just two? Okay. I'll read their name, and if you could just raise your hand real quick, I'll introduce you. And if you want to, you could approach the podium and say a few words. If you don't choose to, that's fine as well. So, our first applicant is Paul F. Coate. Mr. Coate.
Sound good?
No. Mr. Coate has 45 years of experience in water, from operations to management, and he has also been a past member on our board of directors. Second applicant is Jane Jarlsberg.
Here.
Ms. Jarlsberg is experienced in running a small city in Mendocino County, where she also learned what it takes to run a public entity. Thank you very much. And our third applicant is Dave Mistel, who's not here in attendance. He is a retired firefighter and paramedic, and also lives in Joshua Tree full-time now. With those three introduced, if the board has any questions or would like to discuss the applicants further, we can at that time. Otherwise, we can make those appointments through now.
Okay. Director Reynolds, you have anything you'd like to say?
Well, mirroring on what was also said, the importance of the CAC is just amazing. And Karen, I'd like to recognize you for all the years and years that you have helped out and served, and boy, we should throw a party for you. Thank you. I don't have any objections to any of the applicants, and welcome, and you have my full support. If I can ever be of service personally, you guys feel free to give me a call too.
I have no problem at all with Paul and Jane, but I'm a little concerned that one of the applicants is not here tonight. Dave Mistel? I guess I would approve tonight the appointments of Paul and Jane, but I don't know if I can approve Dave Mistel because he's not here.
But they're first.
No.
Look here. But I was gonna wait till you guys are.
Well, you please do, and hold on.
Yep.
So, okay, that is, we'll come back to that. Director, all right.
No, I'm, other than Rebecca's comments, which it would be helpful to have the gentleman here in order to be able to see him and talk with him, I would, what I don't know, since our vetting process is pretty limited, is, to what extent you, President Johnson, or General Manager Ban has spoken with them. So if I had a sense of the level of vetting that was occurred, I might feel more comfortable with, making a decision tonight regarding Dave Mistel. And I don't know if either one of you could speak to that.
Yeah, this application was actually one of our most recent applications to come in, and so staff hasn't had the opportunity. Beverly, have you had the opportunity to speak with Kathleen?
Kathleen spoke with him. I spoke with him. Tom had far more exposure to him at the market. Do you recall anything that you could share with the board?
Is it my turn?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, Dave has breezed by the farmer's market a few times. He is he's one of those desert common sense kind of people. I can't imagine any reason why he wouldn't contribute minimally that to the board. He's got the time, he's an older man, and I'm optimistic that he will be just fine. He might even be fun, too. But if the board wants to delay that until we chat with him a little more, that's fine.
If you think he just maybe didn't understand that he could be here tonight, if you think that was something that would allay my concern?
Well, historically, we have approved people to the CAC that have not been here.
Yes.
We have done that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, to me, on
Put it
its
in context.
face, it's not an issue, it's just that because he was not here and I didn't know what level of interaction had occurred with him, given that we have one of our board members that interacted with him, that, states a favorable opinion, that helps me in deciding whether or not to recommend that we take up his nomination tonight. And then that speaks to something else I want to say, and it's not about our current applicants, because I do support them, but President Johnson, I think Beverly had a comment related to my question. Would you be okay recognizing her?
Oh,
I did add his email to the agenda list, so he did receive the email, but the other concern I have is he may not have a computer. So maybe that's why.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So I think what this speaks to about...
Beverly.
That Beverly,
Yes.
sorry. I think what this speaks to for me is our vetting process, and I think that, to me, there needs to be a balance between, first of all, I really appreciate that people want to serve, and I don't want to discourage that. I want to encourage that, and I don't want to make the vetting process too cumbersome, but on the other hand, I think it would be good if, since the president appoints them, we can talk about this in the future, about maybe developing a process where we have the president, the general manager, and maybe one other board member as sort of a subcommittee that vets them out, and then, develops a recommendation to the entire board through the president, in the future, just to make sure we have some sort of a process where, like, General Manager Van has seen their application, maybe had a chance to talk with them, because as you all know, I serve as the executive director of the Mojave Desert Land Trust, and we have a process like that for board member recruitment, where we make sure that the folks that are going to be interacting with the executive director and the board, that we all will be able to, we think we'll all be able to work well together, so that might be something we want to consider going forward. But I don't want to hold up the show tonight, it just brought that to mind for me, so.
My turn again?
No.
You're at arm's reach now. Please. Well, let's bear in mind, too, if this goes as predicted, Mr. Other Dave right there is going to go through this next time, so.
Oh, well, given the grilling that Gary's talking about.
Yeah, put him over the jumps. But
Not too many hoops, just little ones.
So we won't be going out of our way if we delayed that one until next time, and when we take care of put Dave on the committee next time, I was actually hope we do. We can do this Dave too, if you want. I mean, I don't have a dog in this hunt, I don't care either way.
What was nice is that Dave Mistel said, what do you think you'd contribute? He says, I need to know what are the concerns of the people of Joshua Tree. I thought, well, you know what, that's good.
Yeah.
This is a good place to find out. This is Advisory Council of Water District, so.
I would say, what's your pleasure, Mr. President, since you make the appointments?
Well, I think we'll stand with Director Unger, and we'll take the two names of the individuals that are here under consideration, and we'll move on those. But Jane, I see you standing here ready to say something to us, so please do.
Well, maybe a little bit more. Jane Jarlsberg, I am a permanent resident of Joshua Tree. I bought a house here, the first house that I've ever in my life, just a little over 2 years ago. And the funny part is, they gave me a 30-year loan. I love it. I don't think I'll live to pay off the loan, but maybe I will. Joshua Tree is a great place to grow old, Anyway, I appreciated hearing a little more about what the rules are for attendance. I was going to ask the same question that Gary asked. Also, I appreciate the fact that we're going to be involved in legislation. It's one of my interests, actually. I'm also, I don't think I mentioned anywhere, I'm a California senior legislator for Assembly currently, and go to Sacramento once a year with the California senior legislature and discuss the impact of legislation for seniors, and I represent Morongo Basin. So I'm wearing a couple of hats already. But right now, I was wondering how many people here are on the Citizen Advisory Council, how many sit on the council right now. I read where you have 9 to 16 or something, some number, but I wondered how full it is right now, and obviously, I guess you're recruiting more people. Anyway, I'd like to know a little more about that. And I know Gail is one, but I didn't know who else. And then you're leaving? Is that what I hear?
No, I'm chair.
Oh, you're chair. Oh, that's why we have a party.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, all right. So there's 2 other members of the council here?
That are here tonight.
Tonight, that's what yeah. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say.
I had a question, PJ. What is this small city in Mendocino County?
It's a town called Point Arena. It's on the coast of, on the Pacific coast. It actually is relatively similar to Joshua Tree in that there is a designated public lands that has been recently made a monument, national monument. And it's has been traditionally a fishing town and lumber town, but has moved into tourist area, environmental tourist area, and is being impacted by Airbnb situation. Part of the reason I moved is that I couldn't really afford to live there anymore. The expenses are going up. Mendocino County is a lot like San Francisco area in prices going up, but it's a very small town, and I was the interim city manager for a while until they hired somebody, and then I was city clerk, and I've been the city treasurer. And actually, I was going to say the town was incorporated in 1908, and it's the smallest town in Mendocino County, and it was incorporated before guidelines that are current, like Joshua Tree. You have to be a certain size now to be incorporated as a small city. So it got under the wire.
Interesting, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Thank you.
I appreciate all the credit I've gotten and honors. I intend to continue, and tonight represents a face forward leaning into upgrades that were not previously in place. The training, I'm impressed with the level of training, which a lot of those recommendations came from our new general manager. We're going to get a tremendous education in water policy. In all the years I've been here, I still have plenty more to learn, so I'll be around for that. I used to call all of the chair members before a meeting to make sure that they were, check in with them, make sure they were going to show up. Maybe that's why Dave didn't show up, is because I failed to make the phone calls this month. I think that's probably a good place to start with our new policy upgrade, membership, and there's more applications out there in the pipeline, so this is going to be an ongoing subject, I think. Improving our Citizens Advisory Council. The name change, by the way, is because we're not a committee. Committees are required to have board members on them. We not only do not have board members, we won't let you speak if you show up. So we're not a committee. We're not a committee, we're a council. We give advice.
Thank you.
Are we still in public comment?
Yes, sir.
Al Marquez, Sunfair Community. I like to be positive about all these comments that I make, but it's hard for me to do that. only because I have the experience of being on the Citizen Advisory Committee back 2008 to 2011, appointed by Gary Lovelace when he was on the board of directors. And I resigned after 3 years on being on the committee, only because the committee, majority of the members that were on the committee weren't representative of the community, the ratepayers and the owners of this district. And I'd gone through a lot of frustration and stuff like that, and I applaud that the board of directors appoint people to be on the committee, but the problem that I have is that being appointed by a board of directors on the committee, that they have to have a, for the lack of the word, but to follow what the board wants them to do, loyalty to the board and the district. And what I have seen in the last 10 years, the committee has not been loyal to the community, it's been loyal to the board of directors and the district. So I hope with these new people that are on the board, or on the committee, will be representative of the community and not the board of directors and the district. And also, the last thing I'd like to say is that there's no difference between a committee or a council. I have a problem with that, them being called a council. They don't have no authority, any more authority that they had prior to this need. And I was on the Municipal Advisory Council for Joshua Basin, Joshua Tree community, and we had a 7-member council for the whole district. And that's 100 square miles in Joshua Tree, including all the communities in Joshua Tree. And we were at called a council, we were called a committee, but there's no difference between the two. So I don't know why you want to change it from a committee to a council. Thank you.
Kathleen Radnich, I'm here to speak about the recruiting that we're doing out at the market, just to maybe allay some concerns. I don't ask people if they'll be loyal. I don't recall that ever being an oath here, nor in the time of a year that I've sat in on meetings have I ever heard them say, well, you have to do what the board wants. I have seen some pretty active conversations amongst the committee where there was very good discourse that they agreed and disagreed on because they were very different. And these are some of our people who have shown up loyally to the cause of water, not to you people. They are not loyal to people, they are loyal to this precious natural resource. And when we're out at the market talking to people, and when they come forward and say, number one, they're a resident, because that's the first criteria, and number two, they're impassioned about and worried about the water, fill out a form. That's about it. That's the criteria. We don't vet them anymore. I guess that's what you guys want to do. But I'm saying if they're that actively involved and concerned about our community and our water, we have a place for them. And that, I just wanted to clarify how we are recruiting at the market. Thank you.
All right. Well, if I would have known this was going to be this exciting, I would have, scheduled more time on this one. With all the comments being made, I would entertain a motion then, I assume. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Director Reynolds, that you're recommending that the board consider approving changes from the Citizens Advisory Committee to the Citizens Advisory Council and recognizing the ability of legislative and public information committee. That should be, and all committees, I think, and with the Citizens Advisory Council. something to that extent. Do I have a second on that? Thank you, Director Hund.
So this is the first part of this then?
And we would then move on to accepting as members Paul Coate and Jane Jollisberg. Can we make that all in one?
Yep.
With that motion made and the second, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome.
Now to some exciting stuff here. First annual review of the reserve policy adopted on May 16th, 2018, and I think that's Ms. Griff.
Yes, hard to believe, it's been over a year since we did all this work, and our reserve policy itself requires annual review of the policy. It's supposed to be in conjunction with the budget. We're a little behind this year. There wasn't anything in this review that impacts the budget, so that's kind of a non-issue. But it's also the opportunity for us to look at a brand newly implemented policy and make sure that it works for the organization. And I found at least one thing that doesn't really work for us, so we're recommending that change. There's some typos and, minor little things in here that we're fixing, but the major things I'll spell out for you. The capital improvement plan reserve account. So that reserve is currently designated to address all those issues, all those infrastructure issues that are identified in the board-approved capital improvement plan. What we've recognized over this year is that we have no other type of reserve for other non-CIP capital work, okay? If that capital work, it does not qualify to be funded with the replacement reserves. So replacement reserves are for things that we're reconstructing, replacing, not for new things, not for expansion of capital. We have no bucket where that kind of work can be funded from. Needs to come from this fund, okay? So we're going to rename it the Capital Reserve Account in its entirety. We've also proposed the elimination of the reference to depositing 50% of the annual net revenue after the audit. Remember, our audit comes back to you around December, which is roughly 6 months after our fiscal year has ended. So in that ensuing time frame, this is cash flow. Cash flow is dynamic. It changes every single day. Money's going out, money's coming in. We may have already earmarked or designated or have even spent money that we thought was available in that 6 months' time. Now we've got to figure, after the audit, the money in all likelihood won't even be sitting there available to be transferred into this account. That just won't work. It simply will not work. It needs to be eliminated. We had not identified where does the money come to replenish the reserve fund. And that's identified in our rate study. So we have each year of the rate study, the cash flows in there tell us how much money is going back into the reserve fund, and we're now designating that that's where the source of this money comes from. That's the amount, that's the number, okay? Our building replacement reserve, I'm sure we're all aware that we replaced the major expansion at our shop within this past year. That reference was included in the original reserve fund policy, saying that a major expansion at the shop was planned within the next 10 years. We've eliminated now that reference. That's no longer an issue. It's nothing we need to save for anymore. And we've changed the office expansion, which is a 1,000 square foot expansion is what's been planned, from 10 years to 9 years. We've clipped a year off of that time frame now. So we've also adjusted that target balance down to exclude that shop expansion. That's no longer an issue. Our equipment and technology replacement reserve, we've added information there about all this new equipment that we bought for our SERP crew, our capital improvement replacement program. And added information in there that the annual reserve funding should be increased so that we can build that fund to replace that equipment after 10 years. That will be our new target balance. Unfortunately, we have a rate study in play. In order to replace that $1.7 million, we would have to double the annual reserve funding for the equipment and technology replacement reserve, and we don't have that money available in our current rate study, in our funding scheme. So we will have to play catch-up when we go back for the next rate study, which would be in 21-22. Meter replacement reserve, we talked at Finance Committee, and I had originally recommended that we would transfer any remaining balance, and it looks like about $500,000 is what we project after the 5-year meter replacement cycle, that we would then transfer that back into that CIP reserve, and the Finance Committee felt that another option would be that we simply leave that in the meter replacement reserve, and use that to kickstart the next meter replacement cycle. Remember, every 20 years, meters, and the longer we wait to start building that fund, the more we have to fund every single year. So we're putting sort of that either or. Either we will transfer it back into the CIP reserve when we're done, or the board will decide to leave it in the meter replacement reserve and move forward with the next cycle. Studies and reports replacement reserve, we increased the target funding balance here from $50,000 to $100,000, and in all honesty, I'm not sure that's enough money at this point. We do a lot of studies, a lot of significant reports here that have to be updated on a pretty regularly occurring basis, so we're increasing that target balance, but again, we don't have more money to throw at that because our rate study hasn't provided that. Okay, we've got that money all spent in other ways, so we'll have to address that in the next rate study cycle and play catch up at that point. So use of the CIP and individual replacement reserves, I clarified there, adding information that the board will authorize the use of those reserves during the budget cycle. All of those, money's coming in, money's going out, the use of those reserves is all spelled out in that budget. And that's, when you approve the budget, that's the authorization for those funds, is what I'm saying here. So we found over the last year that implementation has been a little bit difficult. This is much more restrictive than it used to be, cash flow. Every single expenditure has to fit into one of these buckets, and we got a whole lot more buckets now. So it will improve as new projects come on, because from the get-go then we've got to figure out what bucket they come from. Now we're kind of we're closing a project now. Where's the money supposed to come from when we didn't designate it at the beginning? We didn't have this structure in place. So this will smooth out over time. We've tried to identify the challenges, the hiccups, the speed bumps that we've run into, and at this point in time we feel this is a really big improvement and makes this a more usable document for those of us who have to administer it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I'll start with Director Hunt if we have any questions.
Yeah, so for the changing of the capital improvement plan reserve account to the capital reserve account, if I understood what you said correctly, Susan, you're talking about changing it to be more flexible to fund new capital projects if they're identified. You're not talking about, this would not allow any of it to be diverted to operating expenses.
Absolutely.
Right.
Completely capital. We've identified this discrepancy, though we have projects, new capital work that you've identified that we need to move forward with, and we don't have a bucket to put that in. So this is the most logical bucket for that, and so we're changing the name and the use of that reserve, yes.
Okay, and then on equipment, technology, and replacement reserve, that makes perfect sense to me that if we did purchase a number of pieces of equipment in order to be able to lay pipe ourselves, and we have to figure out a useful life and amortize that useful life over time and be setting aside money so that we can replace, the motor grader when it's worn out. So that makes sense to me. The question I have, though, is, and I can't recall from the rate study how much, if at all, it took this into account, but we anticipate a savings of, I think, $800,000 or $900,000 a year over contracting out the pipeline work. So it would seem to me that some of that savings that we realize could be made available to put into the equipment and technology replacement reserve.
The rate study identifies amounts, it doesn't identify quantities.
Right.
So
Right.
if we can do more work with $1 million, it's still just $1 million for cash flow purposes. I mean, over long term, over 50 years, you'll have less cash out, obviously, if you're saving, nearly $1 million with the project. But in the rate study doesn't identify how many feet at how much cost. It simply says, you're going to get $1 million for your infrastructure work, or, whatever the number is. So that isn't really considered in there, and we've spent, we've worked this program to meld with the rate study and those figures that we've got for this type of work. So the money isn't really there.
Okay, but like you said, over time...
Over the long term, not in the short term, and I would say not over 10 years.
Yeah, well, if we're saving money on our operating expenses annually, or
Right.
our capital replacement expenses, it would seem like we could then put that back into other areas, and this could be one of those. So there could be I would think there could be some offset over time.
Yeah, some savings over time, right.
So, and then on the meter replacement reserve, in terms of options, one would be to transfer the balance in this reserve to the CIP, but what about transferring it into the equipment and technology replacement reserve?
These are the two options identified. The policy itself allows the board full autonomy to change, any of these policies at your whim, essentially. If at the time this project, the meter replacement project, is done, and we think this is the best use of it, then the board can absolutely make that decision, and, someone will be coming back to you at that point. It won't be me, but someone will be coming back to say, we've got $500,000 left, here's the options, do you want that or something else? So, yeah, you have full autonomy in that regard.
Right. Yeah, no, I knew we had the autonomy, but I just didn't know what the thinking was, if that had even been considered. And my only reason for bringing it up to you and the board is that, $1.7 million of additional equipment and technology replacement costs is a lot. And so we have to, almost immediately start looking for ways to fund that, or we're going to have a lot of catch-up to do when we look at rates again, and rates could go up significantly. And the whole idea from my perspective or perception was that by funding this equipment, we would realize cost savings in what it would have cost the district to lay the pipe under contract. So it seems to me that by going with that strategy, the cost to the district would have been more if we were contracting out every year. So our revenues should, to some extent, better meet our operating and capital needs than they would have if we'd been contracting out. So it would seem like that would be reflected in the long run in how much we would need to raise our rates. So, I know you're the pro, I'm just thinking here in terms of...
I think what you're going to see is that it's going to take you, 20 years instead of 30 years to do the work, or something along those lines. I think the savings comes in the long term. We're simply getting more bang for the buck. We're still spending $1 million, but we're getting more footage. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So there's no, measurable savings in that regard unless there are operational, efficiencies as a result of that. If there's less overtime because we don't have leaks, that's a very, a direct correlation to, to replacing pipelines. So I think, it's long-term, it's in how long ultimately this work is going to take us.
So you're saying that we can replace more pipe as a result.
Right.
But we could make a conscious decision to be metting that out over time.
I think the only other option could be that you're going to say, with $1 million, we would pay a contractor and we would get, whatever, 1 million feet. if we want 1 million feet, how, we're gonna do 1 million feet, but it's only gonna cost 750,000, so we're gonna spend 750,000.
Right.
I think that's the only way that you could get the kind of savings that
Savings,
you're
right.
talking about.
Right, so
We're getting more for the same money is
Right,
what's
so we'd
happening.
have to make a conscious decision to
Yes.
say, we'll replace as much each year as we could have with contractors.
Right,
And then
right.
we'll bank that savings.
Yeah,
So,
long
okay.
term, yeah.
Well, it's just something to think about.
Yeah.
So, but we all recognize we need to replace our pipe, so.
And I think, these decisions will be made, that decision will be made in 5 years when the meter replacement project is complete. And then we're reevaluating all of these and saying, where do we need help? Where are we overfunded? What's underfunded? I mean, speaking of technology, we've got the technology master plan that is on the to-do list. So, there's a whole nother potential area. We're only dealing with equipment here, the whole, technology piece of this that, potentially
Okay,
will
just
have
one-
increased costs as well.
And one last quick comment, it does make sense to me, it does look like for studies that, $50,000 per year is, based on the studies that we've needed since I've been on the board, it seems a little lean.
Yeah, just not
All right,
working.
thank you, President Johnson.
Well, too, a lot of these studies that we're doing are new and required by the county, the state, or the feds, or somebody. It's not
Oh, yeah.
something we just say, oh, wouldn't it be neat to find out?
To do
if
another
this
study?
Yeah.
happened? It's stuff that we have to spend a lot of staff time complying with.
Yes.
I think
Oh.
that'd be a good word for it. I just have a couple of things, because I could go on. I'm trying to kind of emulate my predecessor by not being too windy these days. But is this resolution 19-1007, is this an amendment to the current reserve fund
Yes,
policy?
yes.
So it doesn't go away?
No, you
Okay.
can see, now therefore be it resolved that the following sections of the reserve policy are hereby amended in their entirety as follows. So take out section 9.0103, put this one in its place. That's what that means.
So these guiding principles in the
Oh, they're all still there, you bet.
okay, yeah, I was kind of curious about that. I noticed, I'm on page 52 of 69, and in about the fourth paragraph, it says the target of the operating reserve fund is to maintain a balance equal to 3 months' average operating and debt service expenses, excluding depreciation. Could you talk a little bit about that, excluding?
Well, depreciation is the annual expense of a long-term capital asset. So you buy a house, this is something everybody can relate to, you buy a house, you're making a payment on it, that has a 30-year payment, but sometimes, a house will last longer than 30 years. So what is the value of that house? And we do, depreciation on an annual basis. What is the value of that house applied back to you as an expense over each year? So we typically pay our assets in full up front. So we, bought a $350,000 motor grader. How are we going to spread the actual use of that motor grader? Because it will last us 10 years. That's $35,000 a year over 10 years if it's a $350,000 motor grader. It's a very simple premise. So how do you take the expense, that you incurred all at one time to purchase that and then spread it over the actual useful life of that asset? That's what depreciation is. So we've set up all of our replacement reserves as a way to fund our depreciation. So we don't need to fund it here. Those replacement reserves, that's exactly what they're attempting to do, is to fund replacement.
So, with those replacement reserves, which are funded, I assume, on an ongoing basis?
Yes, exactly.
Is that somehow related to the depreciation of all of this equipment? Is there, I know there's inflation factors.
Yes.
And equipment costs could be,
Yeah.
who knows what they could be, but is that kind of like in there a little bit?
A little bit, yes,
Okay.
yes. So for example, because the district has been in business for, 55 years, I think, or something like that. We have asset records going back to 1963. So some of your assets, they weren't well identified. I mean, before I got here, that kind of stuff wasn't well identified. So you don't typically write off assets that you really can't identify, you leave them there, you know. We're not a tax-paying entity, so, you know, a private corporation would do something different with that. But, you know, we're not in the business of getting rid of assets, writing off assets if we think there's a possibility that they still exist. So I tried to look at the asset value, but also then look and say, what are the studies and reports that I know of that we do every single year? Kind of get those on a list, look at how much they cost us each time, look at what's the frequency, how often do we have to repeat that, and then, you know, use all of that information and to try to come up with a number. And so it's partly a WAG, you know, it's partly based, I mean, it's based on actual data, but it's not the greatest data, and so, you know, a lot of assumptions had to be made about it. But, you know, that's why we're seeing some of these target balances, you know, it isn't 50,000 for studies and reports. Gosh, there's a whole bunch of new studies and reports, you know, that we've identified. And so, you know, we're you know, adjusting, modifying, and hopefully that helps explain that.
Well, generally, what I'd like to see is some to not so much, to use your bucket metaphor a little bit, to tie management staff down too much with some of these requirements and things. I would like an environment where the staff has an ability to maneuver with the funding, to take advantage of certain things. I mean, you can save money by spending money in a certain way, like buying 2 years worth of water instead of 1 year. It was like $900,000, I think it was. And I also, it registered with me that thing that Mr. Ban, General Manager Ban, said at the dedication, where he essentially said, and he's here to correct me again if I'm overdoing this, is that if you give him the money, he'll lay the pipe, and if he doesn't have the money, he's going to slow down or make the rate of construction, so to speak,
match up. Right.
And so my emphasis, because the pipe we're in our display at the farmer's market this month, there's photographs of pieces of old steel or cast iron pipe, whatever that stuff is. And so there's a priority, I think, to laying pipe. And so with this flexibility thing that I'm encouraging, it would be to lay pipe is what I would like to do. Because there is that obligation that we talked about where if we're accepting standby fees from people, that we have to be standing by, and that means that we have to have the infrastructure out there to where we're actually keeping our promise when we accept the $1 million plus. Night out. $1 million plus standby fees.
What I'm hearing you say is that you're maybe not as fond of the very restrictive environment that this reserve fund policy has placed on us. And so I would suggest that maybe one of the committees, maybe Finance Committee, would take up that issue and see if you wanted to amend the policy by adding some language like that. While, you know, I mean, most of the authority in the reserve policy is reserved for the board. I mean, the general manager can deal with things that are emergency because our admin code allows that, and it's specifically, you know, delegated in the admin code and therefore in this policy. I have authority to deal with operating, you know, concerns because I'm dealing with running the district on a day-to-day basis. So, but most authority in the policy resides with the board. So if the board wants to encourage, you know, that kind of thinking, that the board wants staff to recognize that these are the guidelines, but if there are other options or opportunities, might be the way to say that, if there are other opportunities where moving this money around in a way could create that, you know, that opportunity to install pipe or something, then, I mean, maybe you'd want to articulate that in the policy so that staff is then encouraged, you know, to see how the policy might work otherwise, because we're now working within the much more restrictive confines of this policy. I mean, that's the direction that we believe that we have. So if you want us to think more outside of the box, if you want us to say, gosh, if there's too much money over there and not enough money over here, let's transfer it, whatever, then, I mean, I think that needs to be articulated in the policy, because it's not like that at all. Okay, so that would be my...
Staff over the years has proven very skillful and adept at spending money in a way that saves money or gains us something. I forgot how much from the buying 2 years worth of water.
Right.
We avoid the pay or the rate increase for next year saves us something like $17,000 or something like that. That kind of thing, I'd hate to see that go away in having these specific buckets that we're trapping ourselves in. So it's just something to think about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Director Reynolds?
Oh, thank you. Susan, you have an uncanny ability of digging in deep and finding all of these numbers, and you report back to us, and it's usually very clear, and all of this is I'm pretty happy with. There was, with the exception of one thing, and that is the studies and report replacement reserve, and it says I changed the target balance from 50,000 to 100,000, and I'm not arguing it. But my question is I'm sure you base that on history and what did we spend last year on studies and stuff, and I would just be curious what those numbers were. What did we spend last year and the year before on the studies? And
I mean, I can bring that back. I don't have.
I'm sure you could. I figured it was right on the top of your head.
Yeah, I amaze you sometimes like that, but not always. I mean, as an example, this past year, the board authorized the redo of the wastewater treatment strategy. 40, either 32 or 42,000, I can't remember now. It's another one that kind of wasn't really on the list. It was sort of like, gosh, we did that one time and didn't really expect that would need to come back again. And I mean, we did a whole bunch of these safety programs, the hazardous mitigation plan, I mean, several of those. It was a big report and study year. We did the strategic plan, we did the employee, what was it, this organizational assessment. I mean, there's far more than 100,000 spent on reports, each year over the last couple of years.
So why are we limiting it to, I changed that from 50 to 100,000?
Well, because I didn't really go back and reanalyze, we felt that 100,000 was a good number. We don't have the additional funding to fund it anyway, okay? The rate study doesn't allow us to dump another $50,000 into this replacement reserve. We don't have that money in the money that we're generating from the rates. Same as with the equipment and technology. That additional funding does not exist. We're going to pull it from somewhere else to put it here, and that isn't the plan. So by the time, we get to the point when we're, again, probably next year, then, I'll put a note in the file and look at this a little closer at that point in time. I'm very comfortable that this is a very realistic number, if not a too low number, sadly.
Yeah, that's what concerns me, is, as you said.
But we can't fund it anyway, so that's why I'm saying it's kind of a non-issue. I mean, we'll have to come up with the money if we need some more, studies or reports than is available in this fund. We'll have to come up with it from somewhere.
Right, and this is, this is a policy, not a budget.
Absolutely, yes.
And so we gotta clarify that.
Yeah.
Because it's not, we are limited to that 100,000 or the $50,000 in the studies, but that's all I had to say. I was just curious what we spent last year on the rates and studies.
I mean, we're trying to really stick with the rate study projections. I mean, we're really working at that. We're in only year 2 of the rate study, I think. So, if you get off track from how much you're spending at the beginning, it just gets really bad, over time. And we're going to end up with far less money at the end than we predicted, so, yeah. So it's
Then we're
important.
in trouble.
Right, right.
The buck stops here. Okay, thank you.
No, it was great to hear the other directors, because, we had a chance to go through this in finance, but either the other directors were there and couldn't ask these questions.
Yeah,
Just like
right,
going through the
yes.
citizen advisory council.
Yes.
So it was good to hear everybody else's comments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just close with thank you for all the energy and hard work, and with that, I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 19-1007, amending the reserve policy.
I would make that motion.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor,
Aye.
signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, so moved and so carried. I guess we're at item 9.
Item 9. So, Mr. Corbin, our distribution supervisor, had spent quite a bit of time today putting together a PowerPoint to go over one of the projects that we had, and unfortunately, we ran into some technology issues that prevented him from showing that tonight, so we'll bring that to the next board meeting. I can say, though, I'm very proud of our pipeline crew's initial efforts. As you know, we took a quick trip up to Tilford, up in the north end of our district. We've got several leaks over there. It's increased substantially over the last few weeks, and so we wanted to replace 1,500 feet of pipeline up in that area. Within 2 days, they had all that pipe installed. They've gone back now and installed the services and fire hydrants. We'll be taking bacteriological samples next Tuesday, have those results back on Wednesday. We'll follow up with reconnects, and then we'll be moving over to the Saddleback project. So things are moving along really well. Wish we could have shown those pictures today too, so, but we'll catch up with that. So the 4-log treatment, going back to well 14 and getting that back online, as you're aware, we decided we'd apply 4-log treatment to that well. We met with the state on July 30 and got preliminary approval to move forward with the idea that we had for installation. So right now, we're getting all the permit amendment paperwork together and drawing some exhibits up for them and some nice long math equations to show that we can obtain the 4-log treatment at that well. Probably about another 30 days to get that over to the state, and then we'll be able to start constructing that. As you know, we're going to use our pipeline crew to install that as well, and so it's, meter replacement, we've got pipeline replacement, we've got 4-log on the docket, so it's, the new equipment and the pipeline crew is kind of getting a full year's worth of work lined up here real quick. So, but I do have every intention that once we do get approval from the state to pull off the Saddleback project for a few weeks to get that 4-log treatment installed, so we can start using that well again. So, and with that, that's all I have. Sarah, do you have anything that you want to report? Susan, anything else? Anybody else? That's good for me.
I'll move on then to director's comments, reports, meetings attended, public outreach. Kathleen Radner.
Well, usually I have a pretty short report, but not tonight, I'm sorry. But I think you'll find the information I'm bringing to you from 3 very significant meetings of great importance. But before I start on that, I just want to give you a few date reminders. We have the long short-term renters manager meeting coming up on August 29th from 6 to 7 p.m. We'll be covering some hints and tips for maintaining septic systems when you've got people who come in and don't have a clue, and water conservation for a lot of the renters. We have information and some demonstrations on, I'll be showing them how various types of toilet paper does not dissolve that easily in water. So little things like that, but it's only about an hour long with a lot of handouts for them because of the city people coming into our area not being familiar with our septic systems, which then impacts groundwater. So that's the purpose of this meeting. If you know anyone that's interested, please give them a heads up.
Where is the meeting?
It's here, right in this room. That again is August 29th from 6 to 7 p.m.
You have a flyer?
No, I didn't waste paper on that one. I just put
Doesn't
it,
have to be paper.
I put it in our newsletter.
Use that thick,
It's on the front
cushy
page of
toilet
the
paper.
newsletter. Yes.
I can pull it off of there.
Yes, all right, and then we have now scheduled the District tours are set for Thursday, October 10th, and Tuesday, October 15th. We have 2 set for this season. There should be a lot of new stuff on this tour with everything going on, and I believe we will be recharging, not actually recharging, but importing our banking water at that time. Am I correct? Yes. Okay, so there will be water in our recharge ponds, which is always exciting. The Low-Income Assistance Program, as of 8/14, we've had 55 people assisted. That's a jump. I think the summer water usage rates probably pushed that one. Still trying to arrange for a presence from United Way to be here to do intake applications. They just hired the replacement. They had a big transition turnover of 2 main people running the program, and she just got hired, one of them. So I do see that happening probably, though, October. I don't think it'll happen in September. The evaporative swamp cooler study officially started yesterday. And, well, there were 25 test units that we had planned to start with at the Quail Village Apartments. I was there for the initial start, and we installed 2, and there was a glitch. Kind of like a costume malfunction. They had tested the equipment on a different unit in Victorville. Everything worked perfect. For some reason, it didn't work. So we stopped at 2. They went back to the drawing board. But considering 2 years ago we wanted to start this program and it got delayed. And then we were going to start it this year and it got delayed. And yes, we're having these wonderful high triple-digit temperatures. Right now, we're not able to take advantage of it. However, because of all this going down, Mojave Water Agency indicated we are going to we're still going to install everything now, and then we will really ramp up with everything in place come March and run it through 2020, the whole study. They do need this study. We need this study. So the apartment complex is joining us. They're very gung-ho on it. I just want to let you know that's where it's at. I believe since we've had nothing but problems with this project, it's going to bring us great data in the end. Got to be positive. Okay, now, August 9th, from 9 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., I attended the San Bernardino County Water Conference. I believe I was the only one there from the Morongo Basin. There were a lot of people there. I thought I met everyone that I knew, but no one from here. Could be wrong. Regardless, there was a lot of information. 90% of it wasn't good. I'm going to try and get through that real fast and give you the good stuff. Governor Newsom wants 3.5 million homes built by 2025 in California. And he wants 69,000 homes built by 2020 in San Bernardino County. 2020. BIA got to stand up and say, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And their reasoning, NBIA, the Building Industry Association, the reason that they, as much as they're pro-building, the reason why they're saying no way, California has so many building compliance restrictions, environmental this and that, that it delays and costs so much more in California to build. And so they're saying until someone lessens those restrictions, this is the way it is. It's just not going to happen. Not that they're not going to try. However, where do we see a lot of empty land? Draw the connection here. That came up. They expect statewide water management with more conservation standards to be coming down the pike. Lots more. That was overemphasized, I believe, but that's all I kept hearing for 4 hours. They kept telling us we need to push water conservation because it's not going away, we need to do more. And the last 4 to 6 years, the building industry claims that new construction boasts a 50% improvement in water efficiency, which means they came back to the water agencies and said that we need to reevaluate our data for the will serve letters based on this 50% improvement efficiency that has occurred in the 4 to 6 years. That's how I looked in the meeting too. So for what it's worth, okay, I'm just bringing back, this is the takeaways. Now, there was a seminar on water regulations and efficiencies, SB 988, which is regulating and delaying the water shutoffs, Susan's favorite, was referred to as a solution in search of a problem by the guest panel. They were totally upset over it. Nobody was happy, and it went downhill from there. The consensus was that they were approaching a slippery slope with this bill, that they saw the bill disguised as an attack on local control that is not going to slow down. The panel shared the economic concern that, in essence, if a district wanted to go for a loan, what 2 of them said, and every presentation had different panels. So you go to the bank and you say, I want to take out a loan. I'm a water agency. I want to take out a loan, and here are all my accounts as collateral. And they said, well, what about this SB 988? Doesn't that mean they don't have to pay you back? And correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, doesn't it kind of feel that way sometimes?
Yeah.
So this created a huge, let's just say no one was happy. And you walked out of that seminar feeling like beat up, because it just got worse and worse as they were chewing it up. Also, SB 988 was analyzed by several of the people on this panel, and they said based on what they are projecting at the state level, if this bill goes through the way it's written right now, 1/3 of Californians would qualify for assistance. Who's paying for it? No answer. There was no answer. Then there was another session called Whose Water Is It Anyway? And in a nutshell, this was a panel discussion on why the metropolitan areas are very pro-Cadiz, and there was no counter-argument to it. Hazard pay, I sat through it, okay? Anyway, the thing was, they also said Cadiz, their lawyers and everyone were there, that they're shifting to farming hemp because it saves so much water. So that's the big go Cadiz. The safe and affordable drinking water discussion, which was another one, AB 605 declaring that water is a human right, talked about the slippery slope again. Whereas, while it looked good on the surface, the panel discussion feared it would lead to major consolidation concerns. And there was great discussion about consolidation and what would put you in the corner for being considered that bad water district. And they got into all of these compliance rules that are starting out really small, where the smaller water districts, they deserve it, they have failed, and they're being bought up or handled or merged. But the way it's being written and handled is opening up this can of worms so that more and more compliance is being projected coming down the pike, and at what point, even some of the larger agencies are saying, ouch, when do we say this is not sustainable? So there was a lot of discourse discussion over this is not good. That was wonderful. At least we had a break after that. They also threw out chromium-6 being one of the examples of the state misstepping their ability to manage water. Now, mind you, these are big water agencies that they pooled and some smaller ones to speak on these panels. So I felt it was pretty well represented. The atmospheric rivers and water supply topic, that was pretty harmless. Ultimately, they have all this new technology, and they're hoping that the new technology will help them in pointing out when an area is going to get slammed before it gets slammed, better than what they do. However, the presenter stated that California has not really done very well in managing water resources. Really? So, it is hoped that the new technology implemented, they can anticipate heavy watershed and thus adjust reservoirs and dams accordingly instead of letting it run out to the ocean. That's the gist of that whole presentation. Of note, I saw Seth Zilke. He says hi to everyone. He's tracking us. Thumbs up for our projects going forward. I also got to sit with Kathleen Teague, the past Aqua president, dear friends of Victoria and Mickey, and she sends her best. I saw Mojave Water Agency was there in great force. I also picked up 2 exhibitors for Water Education Day from this conference. And my final takeaway from this meeting was that the districts throughout California are in the crosshairs of the state. I'm sorry, but it just seemed I kept hearing that over and over. And one of the biggest thing was how there are so few electric utilities. No, and this came from one of the electric companies that was talking. No wonder the state wants to, quote, consolidate all these different water districts. And I kept hearing this and hearing this. And I thought, wow, wow. All right, so then I went to the Water Sector Black Sky Disaster Tabletop Exercise, August 8th. That was all day. I really am going to try and give you the 1-cent version on this. It was just so much. The bottom line was, we have a lot of work to do, an awful lot, but so does every other water agency in Southern California and Northern Cal. Everyone just walked away from this going, oh my. It was critical before disaster that we, all agencies, including water, predetermine our threats, and they went through all the numbers. They made them all seem like they could happen now, that they weren't just hypothetical, and I'm sparing you all those hours of talk. But cyber attacks, electromagnetic pulse, coordinated kinetic attacks, this is all everything hitting power. And as you know, there's a power and water and nexus. So without one, we have troubles with the other. Also, geomagnetic strike, public safety shutoffs from Edison, the large-scale earthquake, which they got into in great detail. They expect a 7.8 in Southern Cal still, and they anticipate losses in the trillions. Fire and smoke is a secondary disaster that, by the way, is something we have to look at too, because smoke, they said in some of the EOCs, even with the fires, they couldn't function. They were getting sick from the smoke, and they had to find filters to bring in and masks and everything because they couldn't even function because the air got so thick. The roads were closed by many down power lines. Of course, they were ruined by, they're expecting the asphalt being broken up, landslides, bridges down, closed. And they're closed not until we clear them, but until they're inspected to be safe. So you have to get the inspectors out. So it's not just clear the road and you can get through. So then we had another session where Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, they got impacted by the Woolsey fire. And that fire burned right up to their front door, literally right up to the front door. And they were talked about, they couldn't breathe. And their problem, actually, there were a lot of lessons learned. But they, at the end of the day, were about ready to send everyone home because they're seeing this fire way off in the distance. But they decided not to. And an hour later, they had to open up their EOC. So what it did is it saved them trying to bring all their people back within that hour. And they said, do not be hesitant to open up an EOC quickly. You can always shut it down. It's harder to do it the other way around. But that was one of the best things they did because a lot of their people's homes burned down. And they had issues. They're like us, staffing. Actually, they had a lot more people. But their problems would have been just like ours will be. We don't have a second layer and a third layer of staff to cover us. There's 24 hours in a day. How many hours can you work? And until the cavalry arrives to relieve you, and what if they can't because everyone else is impacted? These were some of the lessons that they were going through and the issues. One thing that I thought was important, they said that the board, if the board declares an emergency, you can override AQUMD generator compliance rules. That one I want to see in writing, but they stated it. Think about it, because we have these big generators that are out of compliance or soon to be, and they just said, just declare an emergency. And also because of the water energy nexus, consideration that your SCADA can go down, and without the SCADA, you're really messed up, because now you have to physically go out and measure things. And if you have limited staff, what do? Again, this was a tabletop exercise, so these are some of the lessons learned. Also, they talked a lot about messaging. All through this, there was tons on get your messaging worked through, meaning your pre-messaging and your ability to message. And I'll talk to you about the next meeting where we went through that. Anyway, another issue was fueling the generators. You can't just fuel your generators, you have to staff people to protect them and monitor them. Where do you get the people? Our people are out taking care of everything else. This was an overwhelming Las Virgenes Water District pompously said, we thought we had our act together until the fire hit. And then he went through all the failures. So no one is above it. We're all going to be impacted, but we do have to start looking at these things. They also suggested, actually demanded, we keep in mind our people for safety. When a house burns down, a lot of times water lines open up, faucets, showers, whatever. Water's running. And we might send our guys out to turn off the water at that residence because we're losing water, precious water. Don't do it unless the fire department is right ahead of you. Because a lot of times they saw the houses reignited. They didn't burn down to the ground. And to protect our people, they strongly suggested you never go and turn off the water in a fire disaster, which you will have with earthquakes, if the fire department hasn't gone in there first to cut the power, or Edison. And that was a big concern. In hindsight, they said what they found out was they needed more redundancy, more backup power, more interconnections, more gravity storage, more loop distribution and isolation valves. They needed more mutual aid agreements, more emergency plans reviewed regularly. This is one water district. Establish an advocacy or an advance emergency contracts with key vendors. They need to improve communications with gas and electric. And they needed more redundancy in training of their employees, which I'm very proud of here. A lot of our employees can kind of cover for each other with the basics. So I thought, there's one for us. And they suggested if we have the time, which who has time, to create little checklists for jobs. So if someone had to sit in someone else's desk and do their job, some of just the basics. Then there was another presentation, coordination and communication with electric companies, and basically fuel supply requests can take up to a week from the county. So if we run out, it could take a lot longer, and I don't know how long our generators run for, but I was told 3 days. So if we need more fuel, that's something to consider. But from the state, when the county can't get it, and they have to get it from the state, it takes at least 2 weeks, and then a week from the county, so that's 3 weeks.
Kathleen, what was this seminar again?
This is Black Sky Water, here it goes, long title. I didn't even know what I was getting into when I went there. It was Water Sector Black Sky Disaster Tabletop Exercise.
Where was it?
Glendora. But it had people from all over, federal, state, county, it was big.
I mean, it sounds
It was
vast.
big. And anyway, so the fuel supply, the key here, we are not required to provide water in a disaster. We are only required to fix our system. The state, county, or feds are to come in and give water to the community. Didn't know that. We didn't know that. We thought we had to give out water. It's not our job. Our mandate is to fix the system. And that was, they were emphatic about that. Just saying. And just so you know, Trona had 26,000 cases of water in just 8 days delivered, once they got through the roads. There are grants available to fund disaster fuel planning, by the way. And because we have our hazard mitigation plan in place, we can qualify for a lot of this stuff now. Okay. Then today, I attended, the last meeting, was the Morongo Basin First Responders. There was, at the CAC meeting, a discussion about who's in charge up here when something happens. And we got into a great debate over it. Well, lucky for us, this meeting that I went to today, Zach Mullinex, who came once at our request to do some training, has been thus promoted, and he is now in charge. And so he was there to do an overview of Trona and what has gone on there. In his presentation, I have to admit, I went through a time warp of the 1992 earthquake. Nothing was different. So I'm saying to myself, nothing was learned. So I asked Zach afterwards, because I'm sitting there going, well, I could have told you that. They couldn't believe it. People didn't want to sleep inside the shelters. Couldn't believe it. I mean, these are just some of the little, everything he brought up, it's like, yep, check, check, check. So afterwards, we were talking, and I said, I asked him, when did you get involved in emergency management? I could have told you all this stuff. This is how it happened in 1992 here. Exactly. And he says, I didn't start until right after that. I said, oh, well, that explains it all. But here's the good news, everyone. They have a whole crew of people now that know what it is to go through an earthquake. A year ago, I went to the PIO meeting for the county. Nobody in that room had ever been through an earthquake. Nobody. And I was the only one, and what they were proposing was ludicrous. I just said, I'll see you in another century. They wanted things done from all of us that will never happen. Bridges will be down there. I mean, the reality didn't hit them. So now after this earthquake, and the county had to participate in a very big way, and they learned so many things don't work the way they do in fires and floods and all the other things. Earthquake 101 is a very different game. Zach Mullinex and I, we talked afterwards, and I said, we need more organization out here, Zach. But you're telling me we're just back to the same old thing. It's going to happen again. He says, I will commit to you. We will come out twice a month and help you guys get organized. So today, that was very well worth it, because I got a commitment out of our county OES to come and get us going. And I'm just thrilled. I mean, this was a very positive thing. Let's see. The other thing also, by the way, they were not prepared for was 116-degree temperatures. It cooled off to 100 at night. There's no water, no air conditioning. They're all swamp coolers like us. Not here, we've got more AC going, but everyone there was swamp cooler. People didn't understand, this is Tom's baby, that you can't lift 15 gallons of water onto a roof to pour into your swamp cooler. You will fall off the roof. They did fall off the roof. They had secondary disasters because people were desperate. So they have a lot of the issues we would be facing. So Zach Mullinex, OES, have come to realize how valuable and important water is. And water has always been taken for granted in a lot of these exercises, but not anymore. So that is my report. I left out 90% of it. I just want to give you the overview of all these meetings I went to. Yes, Bev?
Kathleen, I got a downer report too.
Huh?
I've got a downer report right after you, so good.
So, Director Unger, I was going to ask you if you would let me report on the July 25th Mojave Water Agency meeting
Go
first,
right
because
ahead.
that was not calendared and has not been reported on, but I'll be very brief. So it just seems like it would be better to go in chronological order. So I attended the Mojave Water Agency meeting on July 25th, and mine's kind of a downer as well, so I'm sorry to say. Don't shoot the messenger. The main thrust that I got out of it was having to do with a number of costs coming down the pike that will end up, a piece of it paid by our district. And it starts with the state water at the state water project level, and then flows downhill from there, so to speak. A number of things were mentioned, and one was that the Lake Oroville spillway that was damaged in the heavy rain year before last. It has about an $800 million repair price tag, and FEMA is denying a significant amount of the charge, $250 million. So that means that the state will, and its water agencies that rely on the Oroville Dam and the State Water Project, and all of us will have to make up that cost. And then also, so it said the costs of the Delta agencies and MWA will be $1 million a year, and that was not in their model. So that, some of that cost is going to be passed along to us in terms of what we pay for groundwater recharge. So I think it's, in hindsight, I think it was a very good decision by us as board and staff to accelerate the rate of our groundwater recharge, annual groundwater recharge, and get more water in the ground more quickly, because I think the price is just going to keep going up.
Way up.
Also, the state water fix that they talk about. Even though the new governor has gone from 1 to 2 tunnels, there's going to be some kind of fix, and they're talking about the water fix costing, going up from $250 million to $750 million in 2035. So, and also there was a 14% bump in the Department of Water Resources deficit this year. So anyway, all of that translates right to cost. Sorry, folks. So anyway, I think that's all I'll say, other than on a positive note, our representative to the Mojave Water Agency, Jim Ventura, looked at the 2 representatives from the High Desert District and the Joshua Basin Water District, and complimented us on our regular attendance of the Mojave Water Agency meetings, and I can tell that means a lot to the board, and that really helps with our capital, with our water wholesaler, the Mojave Water Agency. So I think it's a good investment of our time and a little bit of money for our mileage to go there and attend the meetings and interact with the board members. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
I went to the Mojave board meeting on August 8th, and piggybacking on what Director Hunt said, they had a very sobering workshop, which was part 2 of regional stability, exploring challenges, opportunities, and funding strategies. That sounds kind of positive, but it was, the general manager there, Tom McCarthy, noted that costs are out of the control of Mojave Water Agency. All these cost increases coming from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Department of Drinking Water, the Department of Water Resources, and then he handed off the presentation to their CFO, Kathy Kortner, and she said that by 2055, demand will exceed 50,000 acre feet but our average allotment will be at about 47,000 acre feet. She said that on the horizon were the agency's aging 30-year plus infrastructure, local asset management costs, state water project costs, Department of Water Resources costs, which were, like you said, before that got 15% over what was expected. The DWR, their own asset management costs, like the Oroville Dam repair, subsidence issues, the 50-year-old aqueduct, which has had several failures. Kortner warned that Mojave Water Agency to start going upside down, that's a quote, as to revenues and trying to meet these costs. There's a committee that's they're meeting, they're trying to find ways to cut these costs. And Kortner said they're looking at things like, cutting salaries and maintenance, and looking to increase revenue, like, doing some kind of water leasing, exchanging, or banking, which he said was no silver bullet. Selling their Table A water, which I asked Jim, what the heck is that? I always hear about it. It's calculated on original allotment, I guess. And when you start taking that allotment down, then the state says, oh, well, then that's your new allotment.
Yeah.
And so selling this Table A water, it's like the last desperate result. So what Kathleen was talking about, all these things that are driving, even someone like Mojave Water Agency, this was not a pretty presentation at all. And they're also looking at increasing their capacity connection and development fees. Yvonne Hester, she's a director of community outreach, she's on this committee, she says, and if we can't solve this, she says the state will step in and set these taxes for us. She said that these issues are going through the Technical Advisory Committee, and that's a group that, Mickey guarded her presence on that jealously, and now we all get a chance to go to the TAC. I'm on it for October, the next meeting, and it's a group of local water professionals, board members. Hester said that these fees haven't been increased in 20 years. And she said, but it is unanimous, nobody really wants to raise connection fees, certainly. But it's time to discuss all of this with the stakeholders, and they're going to talk about that at the TAC. One of their directors said, look at everything but raising taxes. And Richard Hall, Director Hall, said, do we really need to be part of the Delta fix? I think they're trying to reconsider how they can get out of that, the tunnels, or the tunnel now. And Director Ventura said, if we don't make increases in a timely manner, he said the increases will be larger. And he warned against ravaging revenues and pointed to the Ridgecrest earthquake and said, we can't wait 2 years for FEMA money. We cannot ravage our reserves.
Yeah.
So I did ask also a positive note to end on, and I think if you went to the water deal in San Bernardino, there was a really interesting report given by Andrew Canchola. He was the winner a couple of years ago of a Mojave Water Agency Innovations Program essay contest. And a young man, 18, 19 years old, he did summer field work with the USGS on stream gauges in the Mojave Basin. They wanted to determine why some of them went inactive. They wanted to recheck some of the figures they were getting. We tested for like gasoline solvents and stuff in the water to verify the information. And these gauges were installed decades ago, and he actually had some interesting historical takes and data to go along with that. Thank you.
All right. August 14th, we had a finance committee. It was only 2.5 hours long, and I'll begin on page 1 and walk you through that. You've heard most of what we've discussed already tonight, so I'll pass that. Water Resources and Operations was also August 14th, and that was Director Under and Director Reynolds.
I was going to bring Mark gave a really, remember you were talking about how you wanted to see where all these different like the contractors we use and the people that do our studies and all that. Mark, you had a great 2-page presentation on that, like where we are with them, who we're still using, everything from the lawyers to people who are doing production studies, just all this kind of stuff. And it was there it is, Paul brought it. It was a really good presentation. It was very, very helpful. It was really good. Mike, did you want to add anything on that?
I think you touched it.
And Director Reynolds has 2 presentations here. One was the July 16th ad hoc meeting that we attended with one of the band. You can just give a brief on that if you will.
Okay.
And then the Association for San Bernardino County Special Districts, if you will.
Okay, well, over the course of time, when we began talking to Mr. Ban about the position of general manager, we are now gone through a series of meetings, getting to know Mark and making the recommendation to move into the position you are. The meetings have been fruitful, they've been helpful. Get to know who you are and what you're going to do and where your ethics lie, and welcome aboard. Second thing I want to talk about is the California Association of Special Districts, or the San Bernardino County Special Districts. It's also generally a monthly meeting. I attended to on Monday. We had a presentation that was sponsored by Valley Municipal Water District, and they had, their guest speaker was Heather Dyer, and she's a scientist, a geological scientist. And boy, if you want to hear some riveting, long chats, you listen to a geological scientist talk about water and how they mitigate projects. And one thing in particular that caught my mind was the Santa Ana sucker. And out there, as we have tortoise here, if there is a one little turtle turd, it stops the project. And the Santa Ana sucker is an endangered species and a very important part of the migratory process in the Santa Ana River. With projects going on throughout, San Bernardino and Riverside, that itty bitty little fish becomes a big darn deal, much like what we went through with the Delta. So she went on and on and on about how they mitigate this, and they actually talking about how you deal with science to overcome some of the constraints that the environment they have to do this with is enormous. And they spend 10 years studying this little fish. And they'll take a mile of the Santa Ana River and have a whole team of scientists study this little fish and what makes it tick and how it makes friends and mates and all this other stuff. And boy, I learned all there is to know about a Santa Ana sucker. But I can talk about it for another hour if you like. But it was very interesting, and bottom line is they did learn what makes the fish flourish and what makes it not happy. And the Santa Ana River has a lot of sand in it. And through all of the latest rains we've had, the sand being flushed into the water has covered up the rocks. And the rocks creates the safe zones for that little fish. And so these little safe zones now are going away because of all the flood and the sand going into the river. And so now they are building little homes for the Santa Ana sucker so they can build more projects. That's all I have for tonight.
I like that.
All right, item 11 is future director meetings, training opportunities, Mojave Water Agency tomorrow, or is that tomorrow?
Yeah, it's already the 22nd.
Director Reynolds.
That'll be me.
Board of Directors meeting on the 4th of September is canceled. The CAC is September 10th at 6 p.m. Finance Committee, which is always exciting, September 11th at 9 a.m. Water Resources, September 11th at 10:30. Mojave Water Agency will be the 12th, and that's Director Florin. I'll just close with Director's comments. We'll start with Director Hunt.
I want to talk about the Santa Ana sucker.
All right, let's get started.
He would know,
No, I actually, Heather Dyer is a former colleague of mine. She was
Oh, no kidding.
with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service before she went to work for the Water District, and we worked with her in close collaboration, our Fish and Wildlife Service, on finding ways to, basically what you're talking about, Mike, is to enhance habitat where it still remains, and to get credit for that so that projects can go forward. And it's actually all these different water agencies that are along the river, and it's quite a tangled web of interests, and entities and agencies have all come together to work on what's called the Habitat Conservation Plan to try to identify all the potential mitigation for that and other species, set it up, set it aside, fund it, and then that will, streamline the process for future projects going forward. So it's really interesting that she gave a presentation, and knowing Heather, I'm sure it was very thorough and a good one. So, and then I just wanted to comment on something that Kathleen said in her presentation that I thought I was thinking along the same lines before she mentioned it, when she was talking about who's going to staff, and guard the generators when all of our staff is out in the field making repairs, and the idea of setting up advanced emergency contracts with entities that provide certain services that could bolster our numbers in the event of a catastrophe seems like a very prudent thing to do. I know that, for example, in wildfires, they have private firefighting firms that they're starting to utilize to augment the numbers of firefighters. Sometimes it's for wealthy neighborhoods, but sometimes it's just general augmentation of the overall fire resources. But nevertheless, if you plan for that and you set something up, it might, if we identify those areas where we're vulnerable and we might be down staff, and if there are firms that can provide those kinds of services, maybe we could do something like that. So I thought that was a good recommendation. So I'll leave it at that. I know it's getting late. So thank you.
Regarding the recent earthquake, I don't think it was in Troy. It might have been the other one, major city there that suffered. Thank you. Besides the military base too.
Yeah.
But anyway, a friend of mine went up there and helped distribute water that was provided by someone else, loading it into people's cars and stuff like that. And that area right there, I guess they had a generator, and they also had a portable swamp cooler there because the heat was intense, and so they had this portable swamp cooler there to cool the area where the military were, and also the actual CERT team members were dealing with water. Well, they, it was this kind of thing they were handing out, and they didn't have a water supply for their portable swamp cooler, and so they actually, bottle by bottle, they had to use these to supply water for the swamp cooler. And it's just it's an example to me about how things have to be thought through. And you have to get really into the details, and you have to tabletop and test and get contrary people in there to criticize things and stuff like that, and to see what's the best thing to do. We had a lot of official people and important people. I think Dave was there at the last meeting at the market. And but I wanted to kind of, in addition to Karen Tracy, who has since left tonight, but Jim Ventura came by. He's the Area 2 or District 2 representative for this area, the Mojave Water Agency, and he was generous enough with his time, mostly with Kathleen. He was there, and he spent about an hour and a half with us there in the heat at that meeting, and I give him a lot of credit for doing that. I did, also just as an aside, I'd mention that I was at the Tactical Advisory Committee meeting at the Mojave Water Agency on August the 1st, and I was surprised to see that Marina West was chairing that committee meeting. She's a former construction manager or some such title here at this district, and she's currently the general manager up at Bighorn. And so it was kind of nice to, when I went there for that, to see a familiar face, and also somebody that understood the ins and outs of this place here. Finally, this is the second time I've served on this board, and under similar circumstances. The first time was when Victoria Fuller passed away after a somewhat long illness, as I recall. And that was hard to do then. I admired her quite a bit. I didn't know her personally, but I watched what she did, and she did it very well. She was the president of this board at least once, and she was just a wonderful person. It was an honor, a special task for me to succeed her on the board. And after a not-so-good election result, I was out of here for about 8 months. But then again, Mickey Luckman passed away. This one was rather suddenly, and that hurt my heart. She was a marvelous woman, very strong and opinionated, and she loved to laugh, and I loved to make her laugh. And she liked my Jeep, and she liked shooting cans with a .22 rifle when we would go. She had my back here too, and I appreciated that. When things get hard for me up here, I could call her and get some consolation. So again, I'm pleased to serve, but it's under the same type of circumstances. I'm happy to fill in for her, but I cannot replace her. She was a wonderful woman. Thank you, Mr. President.
Director Reynolds.
Mine just got me thinking, there's been a few too many board members pass away while they're on these dais. I'm going to increase my life insurance policy. Kathleen, you had mentioned there's a toilet paper that's really not good for septic tanks, and so I wanted to elaborate on that. That real fluffy, soft, cushy stuff. Most plumbers would say, "You betcha, that's good for business." And it's amazing they could even sell it, because it clogs everything, and it does not dissipate quickly. I've been asked on more than one occasion, well, what toilet paper do you use? You know, here we are talking about toilet paper. But yeah, the cheap stuff. That's the best stuff. If you ever wanted to test toilet paper, just drop it in the water and see what falls apart. And that's the stuff that's septic tank happy. Here in the desert, it doesn't go away. It goes into a septic tank, and then from there, the bacteria, the enzymes, have to eat that and turn that solid waste into a liquid, and then from there it goes into a leach field, and then from the leach field it ends up in our groundwater. And so let's be nice to our septic systems, let's be wise, and let's be conscientious about what you use and what you don't throw away and what you put down the drain. And so there's the toilet paper 101. Talking about earthquake awareness, I remember the '92 quake, and I remember I volunteered to help fix broken water mains. I was operating a backhoe, and I was just blown away by all of the water shooting out of the ground everywhere. And yeah, what do? We worked 36 hours straight. I didn't sleep. At best we'd stop for another cup of coffee, and then right back to work. And it was taxing, but when it was all done, it was rewarding, and it felt good that we were able to do some good. And I didn't even live here at the time. I lived in Riverside back when that earthquake happened, but I had a vested interest in family up here. Which gets me to one more point. Be prepared. Have that water in reserve at your house. You'd have, if you have a conventional water heater, you'd have 40 gallons of water already that you can use in a case of emergency. The 40 gallons goes fast. I have those big blue buckets, those big old huge pails, and I keep several of those at my house, just in case. And then, of course, plenty of drinking water. And I've enjoyed your radio commercial, and it makes you think about, now, how do you keep that water to last, while you're storing it so long? And it's a little bit of bleach. And so pay attention, be wise. And I'm fortunate to be in the position I am, because I have a couple generators at my house, so if that happens, and I have pumps. And the thought of not having a swamp cooler, by golly, I'm going to rig something up, so I'm just going to flip the switch, and my cooler's going to be nice and happy when there ain't no power and there ain't no water. I'll just roll a tractor over and grab that big old bucket and siphon the water into my swamp cooler, and let's be comfortable. Let's think about the future. Let's be prepared. That's all I have.
I move we adjourn.
Well, let me just say, I will.
Let's keep on talking.
Go for a second. I want to say thank you to the new members of the CAC. Look forward to your participation, and thank you for your willingness to serve. And I also want to say thanks to our first responders, men and women in uniform out there that keep us safe, and thanks to the staff for all the hard work. I'll entertain that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So, said that.